The cost of living looms large over this election, and so it should. Politicians on both sides of the aisle are keen to deflect blame for the current cost of living crisis, and the supermarkets themselves have been in the firing line, being accused of price gouging by the Prime Minister, as well as the leader of the Greens Party, with the opposition being a little more circumspect, but still openly supporting divestiture, i.e., the government seizing control of the supermarkets where they deem it necessary and forcing them to sell off parts of their business to help you with the cost of living, of course. The message is simple. The cost of living is too high, the supermarkets are the problem, and the politicians are the solution. Vote for me and I'll make the cost of living, and specifically the cost of groceries, lower. But as usual, that's exactly the opposite of the truth, and I'll prove it to you. Because for every dollar that these price gouging supermarkets are making out of you, the government is making nearly $5. So who's really ripping us off? My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and today I'm going to help you to see through the cost of living spin, and specifically the cost of groceries lies that our politicians are throwing at us from every direction. Coles and Woolworths between them made about $2.7 billion last financial year. There's some accounting stuff that means that the actual number was lower than that, but that's the underlying profit after they've paid their corporate tax, of course. And that sounds like a huge number. $2.7 billion when the Australian median full-time salary earner is on less than 80 grand? But as I've covered in a previous video, it's just 2.5% of their turnover, meaning the supermarkets aren't making this much money because their margins are huge and they're gouging you at the checkout. Actually, their margins are razor thin. They make that much money because they sell a vast quantity of product. But you know who is making a truckload of cash from you at the supermarket checkouts? The government. Because their accumulated tax take as a percentage of the supermarket's revenue isn't the roughly 2.5% profit they make. It's not even 5%. It's not even 10%. It is over 15% tax. And that's not even taking into account the fact that you shop with after-tax money. So you've already paid tax on the money. And then 15% of what you spend goes to the government in tax. We're ignoring that. We're just looking at where the money that flows over the checkout counter actually goes. And more than 15% of it ends up in the government's pockets, thanks to the accumulated effect of the GST, fuel, alcohol and tobacco excises, payroll tax, employee income tax, rates, corporate tax, and more. And yet the government claims that the supermarkets are gouging us because they end up with just roughly 2.5%. Let's go through the numbers so that you can win this argument with anyone that wants to tell you that the government are the solution to the cost of living crisis instead of admitting the truth, which is that the government are the problem. Now, full disclosure, I have used Grok to help me track down some of these numbers, and yeah, some of them are best estimates, so these details may not be 100% spot on. I went through an extended back and forth, and I've basically drawn from the 2024 financial year data. I've found industry benchmarks to plug some of the gaps, and then in some cases I've had to make a best guess based on what little relevant information I could find. So there is uncertainty in these numbers. I want to acknowledge that up front, but these numbers will be in the ballpark. And the picture they paint is pretty clear, even if the details might be slightly off. Let's go. From smallest to largest. First, there's all the little relatively incidental fees, charges and taxes like environmental levies and waste taxes and stuff like that. They might seem pretty trivial, but with so many sites Australia-wide between Coles and Woolworths, they add up to about $40 million. Next is one you may not have thought of, fuel excise for the supply chain. Every time a truck thunders from a grower to a processor to a packing company, the packing company to the distributor to the Coles or Woolies DC, and then from the DC to the store, they are burning diesel and they're paying fuel excise. Best estimate, about 50 million tax dollars a year, just there. Next biggest, well, this one surprised even me, but Grok reckons that there's about $96 million in fringe benefits tax revenue for the government every year, which is then immediately trumped by the roughly $120 million in property taxes. Now, this is land tax and stamp duty. Land taxes are something that it applies to commercial properties, and stamp duty applies to the transfer of ownership of land. So every time Coles or Woolworths want to set up a new location, Cha-ching! The government gets millions in stamp duty before the store has even been built. But it's not just the state and federal governments that are cashing in on the supermarkets. There's also the local government rates, running to about $195 million a year nationwide. And let's not pretend that this is for things like footpaths and rubbish removal and parks, like what residential rates are supposedly for, because for the most part, Coles and Woolies pay to maintain their own car parks and they pay for private rubbish removal. So if I were them, I'd be asking these local councils for an itemised bill of exactly what they are supposedly getting for $195 million a year. Now, above that, we have customs duties on imported goods that have tariffs on them. That runs to about $223 million a year in government revenue. Then there is payroll tax, which is a state tax levied on large companies with employees on their payroll. Now, that is a cool $922 million a year. But I have a question. Why? Isn't employing people a good thing? I mean, these employees, they then have to pay their income tax, right? So the fact that there is a payroll is already generating tax revenue for the government. So why are we then taxing the payroll? If taxes on things like tobacco and alcohol are supposed to discourage you from buying them, then doesn't that mean that a tax on payroll discourages you from employing people? This one just makes no sense. But then above that, there is the corporate income tax, which between them adds up to $1.158 billion, or 30% of their combined profits. Yep, they have to pay all of these other taxes just to make a profit. And then when they have a profit, they get taxed on that too. And finally, we get to the top three. In third place, alcohol and tobacco excise, which brings in a cool $1.67 billion over the counter at Coles and Woolworths owned locations every year. The silver medal, well, that goes to the employee's income tax. Now, this can only be estimated, of course, but we put that at around about $3.84 billion in tax revenue for the government, meaning that this one tax single handedly exceeds the combined after tax profits of Coles and Woolworths. But that's not even the big one, because first place, the gold medal, goes to the GST, which I estimate at $5.16 billion a year. Now, you might say, well, that can't be right, Topher, because food is GST exempt, but not so fast. Fresh food is GST exempt, along with a few other items, but actually lots of the items that you'll find on supermarket shelves, along with all the alcohol and tobacco products, attract GST, and that alone adds up to nearly double the profits of Coles and Woolworths combined. Put it all together, the government has gouged nearly $13.5 billion out of us, using Coles and Woolworths as their front. The modern tax system has essentially drafted every private company and made them all work for the ATO. They have to collect money on behalf of the government, do all the paperwork in relation to that money, and choose not to complain as they watch the government make nearly 5 times what they make, while our politicians have the hide to accuse them of being greedy. Can you imagine? You take all the risk, you do all the work, and yet you get called greedy by the people who take nearly $5 for every $1 that you earn, while they do none of the work and they take none of the risk. So the next time an Australian politician wants to grandstand about supermarket price gouging, ask them how they can do it with a straight face, when they are taking nearly $5 for every $1 in supermarket profits. When they talk about the cost of living, ask them what they're going to do about the cost of government. Because now that you know how much money the government are taking from you via the supermarkets, the next question you should be asking is, where is all that money going? If you don't like the value for money that you get at a shop, you take your money elsewhere. But if you don't like the value for money you're getting from the government, what? What do you do? If you stop paying them, they throw you in prison for not paying your fair share. But I think the reasonable question to ask is, what's the fair share for someone who didn't do any of the work, didn't take any of the risk? And should we be shopping with after tax income for groceries, which end up being about 15% tax themselves? We are being ripped off at the supermarkets, all right, but not by the supermarkets. And it's time we no longer tolerated these lazy, price gouging lies from our politicians who want to blame everyone but themselves for the problems which they have created. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to make sense of the world as it goes mad around us. Now, I am 100% viewer supported, so head over to Good People Break Bad Laws and grab a copy of my books, DVDs, hoodies, my online course called the Getting Your Head in the Game Masterclass, and there's more. Please, of course, leave me a comment, subscribe, check out this recommended video from YouTube, and as always, stay free.